Right, hello my YouTube lovelies, and welcome to this episode, not the sharpest tool in the shed. This is the second time I've had to do this because in the first one I did, the first take, I got the title wrong, so totally ballsed up there. So here we go, let's see how this one goes, eh? So this one we're going to talk about the building of what I call my tool shed. Why did I build a tool shed? There's a garage, and the garage space for most people is the garage stroke tool shed for everybody. But because mine runs lengthways, in order to get things out, you're having to sort of sometimes move certain items to get to a particular item. And I wanted a space where things were a lot more accessible, things that I might need on a semi-regular basis. So I came up with this idea of building a storage area which was directly accessible from the back doors, which had the small bits and pieces, the things that were kind of not everyday use but were used on a semi-regular basis, that were easy to get to, that I didn't have to empty a garage. I think a lot of people's garages, in order to get to something, you've got to take half of the contents out to do that. With my van, you don't really need to do that. Pretty much everything that's in the back here is fairly accessible, and I can literally just lay my hands on something pretty quickly. There's some items in the garage that I might have to take bits and pieces out in order to get those, but that's not a problem, because normally when I'm getting those things, it's when I'm parked up permanently somewhere for a while, or on a campsite, etc. So whereas the tool shed, those things are just easier to lay my hands on. The other reason behind it is the whole premise of trying to keep stealth. Now, because I park a lot in lay-bys and public car parks, etc., if I did go into the back of my van, I didn't want the living space to be seen by all and sundry. So I wanted to keep that sort of fairly private. I wanted to sort of keep the idea that it wasn't a motorhome or someone was living in it, so to try and keep all of that down to a hush-hush by creating this space where you open up these back doors and to all intents and purposes it just looks like a works van. The other reason why was because also my initial intentions was to put a bathroom and a toilet in here, and when I built the bed and put in the partition wall just to sort of measure up, the space left wasn't as big as I was anticipating, and to be fair, people do build them in a smaller space than what I was left with, but I figured that having emptied all my contents and gone through that exercise of the 3 metre by 2 metre rug and putting all of my contents on there, I realised that I needed a little bit more space to put things away in. I also had never intended to put overhead storage in the van, so a lot of people you'll see, they'll have cupboards running at head height, sort of maybe full length or half the length on both sides, or maybe just one side. And I didn't want to do that, mainly because I wanted to try and keep that sort of openness and airiness to the van, and also, quite frankly, I would probably twat my head at least once or twice a day on that, so that was another reason why I didn't put it in there. So because of that, I had to come up with an alternative storage space for my clothes, etc., and all the bits and bats that I choose to carry with me. So I'd knocked the idea of the bathroom and toilet. Work for me is I'm in a fortunate position where I've got showers that I can use at work. I rejoined the gym, so I didn't really need to have a shower in the back of the van, so the only thing I needed was a toilet, which I'll get onto that next episode. So I decided, right, we'll just go with a tool shed. The process of the tool shed was, first of all, I put in a partition wall. Now the partition wall I had to sort of guess what the finished height was going to be. So bearing in mind, when I moved into the van, there was no ceiling, so it was just the insulation. So I had to guess where the ceiling was going to finish once I put the finished timber in. So I guessed at a height, cut that off. I did spend one night with the full wall in there, and the idea of the partition wall is primarily to stop me from falling out of bed, but also it's a wall in which I can hoik myself up onto the bed in the evening. So it needed to be fairly structural. So if I remember right, I think it was like a 9mm ply that I used to do the partition wall. When I was lying in bed one night with the wall in place, I realised that it would be really handy to have some sort of cubby hole to my left for a light and my phone or alarm clock, etc, etc. So I came up with the idea of building this small sort of little shelving unit that sat in beside the bed. So the first thing I did in the build was, once I'd got the wall measured and the height cut, I cut out a rectangle piece, which was the aperture for the opening of the shelving unit that I put in. The shelving unit again was just built, I think using 9mm again, created a box, put some shelves in, put it back into the box, and then that's basically, is it screwed? I think it is screwed and glued to the partition wall, so when you take the wall out, it comes out with the shelving unit. But before I put that in, I put the backing into the back of the tool shed. The tool shed's backing is an MDF sheet. I think it's a 9mm again, piece of offcut that I found in the workshop. And that was probably the most trickiest part of the build, because that has an angle that's cut which follows the contours of the side of the van. Now the side of the van of an Iveco is fairly straight. There is a bit of an angle in there, but I don't think it's as pronounced, or the curve is certainly not as pronounced as what there would be on a Sprinter or a VW Crafter. So, but nonetheless, it was still quite tricky. It took me a few attempts to sort of get that right with some offcuts until I was happy, and then transpose those onto the finished board that I was going to cut. There's also a weird little curve sort of cut out, sort of like a notch that I cut out on the top corner where the wall and the ceiling meets. There's like a metal structure that runs the full length of the van there on both sides. So there's a little cutout for that piece to slot in nicely. So that slots in, and what I did, I ran a 2x1 batten that's screwed to that, and that basically enables the two pieces. So where the back of the tool shed is, where that meets on a 90° with the partition wall, that batten that I've screwed down the back of the tool shed wall, that has holes in which are drilled in, and so that is then secured to the partition wall with M10 bolts and wing nuts. The partition wall is in itself bolted to the subframe of the garage and the bed, and again just secured with M10s and wing nuts. So literally undoing those wing nuts, the whole wall comes out, the back of the tool shed comes out, etc. So that was the first process. Make the back in, then I stuck in the shelving unit for the bedroom, and then that's screwed on and glued on, so that's now permanently fixed to the partition wall. And once that was in place, I was then able to work out where the storage space for the spare wheel, etc., was going to go. Now the whole thing is designed around the width of the spare wheel. So the spare wheel normally would sit running down the side of the van, and there's a special bracket on the Iveco where it would bolt into. But I didn't want it running that way because I didn't want it to encroach into the living space, so I therefore turned it on its side, and so that kind of dictated the width of the tool shed. Once that's in place, then I was able to then put my toolbox and various other bits and pieces that I had and work out the widths that I needed for the shelves above. the wheel is secured by literally just flush up against the back wall, and then I've put in a wooden batten which has got sort of pin hinges, so you literally take the pin hinges out, the batten pops out, and then you can access the spare wheel. Then the shelf above that is probably the most heavy dutiest of the shelves, because it's what holds the jack, and the jack is pretty heavy, so that sits on there with a few little bits and pieces of spares. There's also a little cubby hole where it sits underneath the shelf of the bedroom unit, so there's a little bit of a cubby hole in there where I can put bottles of oil and various spares in there, so it sits quite nicely. And then there's another shelf above that which basically houses my toolbox and all of my power tools. Then on the door I've just screwed in self-tapping screws into the metalwork, some 12-inch shutter ply, and I've just cut it into strips so it bends quite nicely. Screwed that in, created like a subframe, and then off that I've then hung this sort of holder with all the various compartments. Then there's another piece of timber further up where I'm able to hook up my saw and the axe and crowbar and various other bits and pieces. The back of the bed was a piece of 5.5, I'm going to say. Yeah, I think it was. And again, a nice finished piece, so that became the headboard. When I first put it in, it was just one solid piece, but at a later date I then decided to put the slidey section so that I can actually open it. If it's a really nice day, I can actually open the back doors and let some airflow going through into the living space. It's also there as an emergency. I've never tried it, but theoretically I can just about kind of get my hand down and pull open the latch on the back door, so I could squeeze out the back if I needed to. So that piece was just cut to shape, and again that's just fitted with wing nuts. Obviously the premise of the whole van is that everything within the van is a component that can come out, so I don't know, give it half a day, maybe a few hours, I could strip everything out, all the contents out, and everything can come out with the taken off wing nuts, etc. Screw here or there, but predominantly all of the pin hinges and all of the components, all of the furniture components, including this back of this tool shed and the cupboard, etc., can all come out. I had intended originally where the toilet sits, which is in the bottom of the cupboard inside, to be able to get access through the back here, but once I put the spare wheel in and everything like that, it was just going to be a faff to have to keep pulling all of this stuff out in order to access the toilet. So I just basically take the toilet out through the front, which is not too much of a hassle. Tool shed is a really cool little space. I actually like it. It's got everything I need, you know, from axe to saw, crowbar. I've got my waffle boards, I've got all my cleaning accessories, spare bulbs, you name it. I've got tow rope in there, the spare wheel, the jack. What else do I have? I've got my levelling blocks behind me. I've got the reel for my electric when I'm parked up. Oh my god, step to go out to the side door, and then in the garage, obviously the garage houses my bike, two very large trunks of spares and tools. I've got a 5-man tent in there. I've got the canopy that if I ever need that, a solar panel for my power unit, table, chairs, wood burning stove, and a couple other little bits and pieces. So there's quite a lot of stuff that goes in there, but all of it really, really accessible. I can pretty much lay my hands to something fairly quickly. So I think we'll leave that there. That's pretty much it for this episode. The next episode will be a fairly short one in which we'll talk about the cupboard, so the cupboard that actually then sits in front of the tool shed. which is accessible from the living space. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you are new to this channel, it'd be really lovely for you to subscribe. If you've liked this, give us a thumbs up, and if you want to have some sort of dialogue, put a little comment in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.